that,
Preach.
because we had an event last week in South Dakota, and the opening
Yeah, thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you so
well
much.
organized. Thank you.
And we are going to let people in right about now.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. If you don't mind taking your seats, we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Just go ahead. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello? Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to everyone. My name is Liz Brailsford. I'm President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. I want to invite you to go ahead and begin eating, so enjoy your lunches. Thank you for being here today in this great room. It is my great honor to welcome all of you to this timely and critical conversation that we're about to have on the global threats and the opportunities that our world faces today, and how our role in America is as important in the world as ever, and including right here in our local communities in Texas and across the state. I am honored to serve on USGLC's Texas State Advisory Committee and have the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth partner on this important event today. And I am delighted to be here with you, all of you across this beautiful room, but with also a true champion, congressional champion, Congressman Mark Vesey. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for all of you, everything that you do for our local community, our state, and around the world. So thank you. I want to thank the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for making this event happen today. Thank you for everything that y'all do around the world and for our nation. This powerful group of leaders from around the state are Republicans, Democrats, and independents, pillars of the academic, business, humanitarian, and faith communities, civic officials, and military veterans. And we have all arrived at the same conclusion, I know. America must continue to be a global leader. We all read the news, so we know there is no shortage of global threats facing our country today, as well as global opportunities. And I think many of you know that more than ever in history, this world will be going to vote for their national elections this year. And it's almost half the world's population, including 7 of the 10 most populated countries around the world. So what happens this year will be consequential to our futures around the globe. I would like to personally thank Representative Vesey for his leadership and for being a fierce leader for Texas, both locally and globally. It's our hope that this dynamic conversation that you hear today will inspire you to continue this vital discussion about America's role in the world with your family, your friends, your colleagues, and anyone else that you talk to about the new ways in which the United States is providing foreign assistance in more effective ways than ever before. And now, to tell us a little bit more about the USGLC's work here in the region around the country, I'd like to welcome Luke Wentz, USGLC's Deputy National Outreach Director for the Western Region and Military. So Luke, thank you so much for today again, and please help me welcome Luke to the stage.
Well, hello, everybody. Liz is a little shorter than me, so I've got to raise the microphone. But it's wonderful to be back in Texas and the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Thank you all so much for being with us. And thank you, Liz, for your leadership here in Texas and for opening our program. Texas is truly lucky, as you all know, to have a true congressional champion in Congressman Mark Vesey. So again, one more round of applause for the congressman. Thank you, sir. I want to thank specifically our Texas Advisory Committee. For those of you who are in the room today, that's chaired by former HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros. If you're a member of our Texas Advisory Committee, can you stand up very quickly as we put our hands together, and thank you for all you do. Before I begin, and I know really today is to talk a lot about the important work that USGLC does and that Congressman Vesey is doing in Washington, but I want to start by first thanking our partners without whom we could not have made this possible, the North Texas Commission and the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Thank you both for all you do. Sure, thank you. And let me tell you just a little bit about the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. At USGLC, we bring together a diverse network of humanitarian leaders, faith-based leaders, business, farmers, veterans, mayors, so many of you in this room. And we all come together from 50 states around the country with the firm belief that America's investment in the world and our investments in our civilian tools of national power, development, and diplomacy are crucial for Texas and for Arizona, for America, my goodness. Our network spans from coast to coast, from Maine to Arizona, Florida to Washington, South Dakota to right here in Texas, and everywhere in between. We have a bipartisan advisory council, which, as you can see on the stage or on the screens beside you, is made up of our smartest foreign policy and national security leaders, from former Republicans and Democrats, former secretaries of state, defense, former leading champions of members of Congress, and more, who all help us make the case for the importance of America's investments in the world. We're particularly proud of our growing voice in the military and veteran community, who understand better than most the critical role that America's investments in development and diplomacy play in our national security toolkit. Our National Security Advisory Council, now over 260 retired 3- and 4-star general and flag officers, and we have one of them with us today, General Speaks, thank you for coming, chaired by Admiral James Stavridis and General Tony Zinni, help us make the case for the importance from a national security perspective that we invest in our smart power around the world. We also have what we call our Veterans for Smart Power program, over 30,000 veterans from private to 2-star who help us make the case for strengthening our non-military tools. And what brings us all together, this strange bedfellow coalition, is the shared belief in America's global leadership. That strategic investments in development and diplomacy are crucial, not only for our economic security and our national security, but to project the very best of the American value proposition to the world. It's why we talk about a small portion of the federal budget, just 1%, called the International Affairs Budget, and why we think it's one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments that America makes around the world for American people. It's been proven that this is a continued show where we receive return on investment that's second to virtually none. Economically, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were at one time a recipient of U.S. foreign aid. On the national security front, we know that every $1 that the United States spends outside of our borders to help prevent conflict saves $16 on the back end that we don't have to spend in military spending alone. And you here in Texas know it better than most. Over 20% of all the jobs in the state are connected to international trade, and more than $400 billion of goods are exported from the state of Texas every year. Look, I know for many of you this is personal. For those of you in the room that have worked in international affairs or are connected to trade, or frankly for all of you, because America's investments in the world matter at home. And therefore, I'm going to ask you to do one little thing for me. And I'm sorry to give you a homework assignment at lunch, but you'll see note cards that say what's it worth on all of your tables. At the end of the day, we're going to go around, my team and I, and pick up those little note cards. And I'd love it if you would write down, after you hear from the congressman, you listen to the panel, or before, write down, what does America's global leadership mean to you? What does it mean to Texas? So thank you all so much. We're really excited for this program today. And before we move to the congressman, which I know we're all excited to hear from, I'm really excited to welcome a key member of USGLC's Texas Advisory Committee to the podium. Please help me in welcoming Chris Wallace, the President and CEO of the North Texas Commission.
Luke, thank you very much for your leadership. Again, welcome to North Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here today. It is my distinct honor to introduce our great panel today. And certainly want to let you know that I am too a proud member of the USGLC Texas Advisory Committee, along with Liz and Robin and many of you in this room. Kirsten, Bryn, the entire team, they do great work. Can we give them a round of applause for this wonderful event, please? We are so proud to be joined today by General Stephen M. Speaks, Lieutenant General Speaks is a retired Army veteran with 35 years of service. Can we give him a round of applause for that? That is awesome. Thank you very much, sir. He led planning and execution for life support of all ground forces operating in Iraq and Afghanistan, supervising 20,000 deployed military and civilian personnel before serving as the Army's principal staff officer for fiscal strategy. Today, Lieutenant General Speaks is the president and CEO of the independent Rough Terrain Center, a Texas-based company that makes rough terrain material handling equipment for military and commercial markets. General, we welcome you to the stage, sir. Thank you for being here today. We are also joined by Robin Lerner, President and CEO of the Texas International Education Consortium, where she oversees a unique state-based consortium of public and private universities who work together to increase campus internationalization. Previously, Ms. Lerner served in the Obama administration as senior advisor and counselor to the Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, Deputy Assistant Secretary to the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and is a senior counselor on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In addition to also serving on the USGLC State Advisory Committee, Robin is on the board of the Ann Richards Foundation and on the board of Global Ties US. Please, Robin, join us on stage as well. We invite Luke back up to the stage as well. Luke's going to be our moderator today. We look forward to him moderating this great panel. And certainly last but not least, our keynote and our fourth and final panelist is Congressman Mark Vesey, a dedicated public servant who represents our 33rd District of Texas right here in North Texas, serving as the prestigious Armed Services and Energy and Commerce Committee as a member of those committees. Congressman Vesey is a trusted voice in Congress and a tireless advocate for Texas's role in certainly strengthening our nation's national security and protecting America's economic stability. As we all know, he has a long, distinguished public service career, first serving in the Texas House of Representatives and now in Congress, and he knows firsthand how to invest in our tools for our national power, to develop and very strategically plan our diplomacy, our defense, to keep our country safe and our resources and keep our country prosperous as well. Congressman Vesey, we are very grateful that you're joining us today. We look forward to your thoughts on how we strengthen America's global leadership. And ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome who will soon to be the Dean of the North Texas Congressional Delegation, Congressman Mark Vesey. Good to see you, sir.
Congressman, thank you very much for joining us today. We're excited to have you. I would love to just offer the floor for you to offer some welcoming remarks, and then we'll get into the panel.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm also excited to soon be the dean of the delegation. I don't know what I get out of being the dean. I think that means when we have like chamber panels and things like that, I always get to go first, so that's kind of cool. But nevertheless, it's wonderful to be here with you today to talk about some serious topics, obviously, that are happening around the globe. The first topic that we need to discuss, and which is fascinating because this is probably all ultimately going to be part of a package that ultimately comes out of Congress, and that is what's happening in Israel right now as a result of October the 7th. And whether or not we fund Israel and whether or not we're also able to provide a substantial amount of relief for the situation in Gaza as a result of what happened on October the 7th. So we're dealing with that right now. The other big piece is Europe, of course. Some of you may or may not know, I serve on a commission known as the Helsinki Commission. I'm one of the Helsinki commissioners. It's a bipartisan commission. And we work on maintaining peace and security throughout Europe. Every year I go to Vienna, every February where we have our conference, and then we always have the summer conference in a different European city. This year we'll be in Romania, and on this commission we talk about a lot of different things, whether it's human trafficking, immigration, many topics, economics, but ever since Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine, we pretty much only talk about how we're going to be supportive of Ukraine As a result of that, the Russians have stopped actually paying into the OSCE and stopped sending representatives as of this winter. As a matter of fact, this was the first meeting where they did not seek visas to participate. But nevertheless, we need to make sure that we do everything to maintain peace and stability in Europe. It's going to be tough because Putin has made it clear that he subscribes to the history that there really is no Russia without Ukraine, that you can't have an independent Ukraine and have a strong Russia. And so I think that we have our hands full with that situation. Taiwan, you probably saw that there was an earthquake that rocked Taiwan. And for those of you that follow the semiconductor business, which has been the chips business, that have obviously played a huge role in the development of North Texas with some of our most venerable companies and organizations, that any disruption to that could be catastrophic for security here in the U.S. And also disturb our economic prosperity here in the North Texas area as well. And so that has huge implications. I think the other piece, obviously, immigration, that continues to be a topic that that Congress just doesn't seem to be able to get their arms around. We thought that we came so close this time to having a deal that one of our most conservative senators to the north, James Lankford out of Oklahoma, who I served in the House with before he went to the Senate, pretty much put together a bill, got some bipartisan support on the bill, and thought that we were going to be able to finally address the issue of immigration. And former President Trump decided that the bill was going to be too effective, and he had Speaker Johnson pull the plug on it. And so, so we feel like we're sort of back at square one. And our relationships with Mexico in particular, even though most of the immigration that we're seeing is coming from Central America, obviously our relationship with Mexico as people cross through there, that's something that we have to be very mindful of, as Mexico is our largest trading partner. Obviously a huge part of the success that we've had here in Texas as we continue to experience a tremendous amount of growth. And so we want to make sure that we keep that relationship right. So there are a lot of different topics for us to discuss on the table, and I look forward to being with you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I couldn't agree with you more. Unfortunately, you took my first question, so we're going to have to move on in your opening remarks. But as we know, today's conversation comes at a unique time. As you mentioned, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, there's no question the world we live in is more interconnected and more complex today than perhaps any time in recent history. That said, Congressman, as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, as a member of the leadership of the committee, how are you viewing America's role in this moment, and what's at stake if America doesn't show up?
The part of America's role right now that really concerns me the most is what's happening in Ukraine. Obviously, since the end of World War II, and everyone here has heard about the post-World War II order that we've all been a part of and has kept relative peace and calm since the 1940s, and has allowed this country to grow, has allowed other European partner countries to experience the same level of growth and freedom. I think that model ultimately brought down what was called the Iron Curtain and much of the USSR. And I think that Vladimir Putin understands that history as well. And I think that his unlawful invasion of Ukraine is his first sort of encroachment to see if we can sort of put those barriers back up again, whether he can put those barriers back up again, to create a level of instability throughout the world. And I think our European allies and partners are watching this very closely. I thought it was very significant this week that you saw that many European countries came together to Trump-proof NATO. I don't know how many of you saw that, but they're watching the polling here. They're concerned, and they want to get ahead of what could be a transition in the White House come January 2025. It's a huge area of concern for them, and I think that you're going to see more moves like that. I can tell you that whenever I go to the Helsinki Commission meetings in Europe, the Baltic states, Romania, where again the conference is going to be held this summer, it's the number one question that they have is what is going to happen in the upcoming elections, because obviously the level of prosperity that we've had, it's been very good for them as well. Right. They want to keep it that way. You know, something that's really kind of fascinating because, you know, we have had to deal with it in our country about, you know, symbols and statues and things like that that are erected and what should come down. And when I was in Bulgaria, it was really fascinating to me. They've tried to take down as much of the old Cold War Soviet stars and statues and things like that, but they still have some of it up. And someone had said when I visited Sofia that, you know, it's a reminder of where we could be again if things become too unstable.
Well, Congressman, I'm going to come back to you for one more question, and then General and Robin, coming to you. As you know, Congress has a really important part to play right now. Well, the Senate just passed a couple of weeks ago the National Security Supplemental Package, and now it's kind of stalled in the House, as you well know. You made a really powerful statement about a week or two ago that I want everybody in the room to hear, so I'm going to quote you directly. You said, quote, "Ignoring the situation in Ukraine and allowing Vladimir Putin to continue in his efforts to conquest former Soviet bloc nations will lead to a wider conflict that will be much more costly and much more deadly for the United States. We need to give aid to Israel, and we also need to do something about the suffering in Gaza." So, two-part question for you, Congressman. First, you know, America, how is America uniquely positioned to help these two conflicts? And why is this package so important to get passed?
I think that this package is hugely important to get passed, again, to just maintain that piece of stability that I've talked about, and maintain that sense of security that all of us have been used to for so long. And this is going to sound interesting coming from a Democrat, but I'd like to invite everybody to go back and listen to Ronald Reagan's speech that he gave at the Berlin Wall when he said, you know, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and listen to some of the words that preceded him making, you know, that comment throughout the speech, and then the words that followed that about how the conditions were in Europe during that time. And for those of us that are old enough to remember just how tense that situation was, and how there was always a fear that there could be further escalation, and how there was a big sense of relief, you know, once the Soviet Union did collapse. And there was obviously a lot of hopes that maybe even there could be some normalization in Russia. Obviously, you know, that did not happen. But thinking that we're going to just sit this out and watch, and I hate to see this level of inwardness that seems to be creeping up more and more in the American electorate, to where, you know, hey, just let them figure it out. We don't want to get involved. We spend too much money on defense. We don't need to be involved in other nations' affairs. I think that it's dangerous. We found out, you know, during the Wilson administration, this country found out how it was dangerous to just sit on the sidelines and watch. And if we're not proactive in these situations, they could escalate out of control. I mean, you mentioned the situation in Gaza right now. I mean, I think that almost kind of like race relations in our country, where people are, for most of what really sort of captivates people when it comes to race in this country is the relationship between blacks and whites. And I think that what's happening right now in the Middle East, most people are just captivated by the conflicts that Jews have had, you know, with Palestinians. But once you really start to peel back the onion on that situation, and you see what the Palestinian people have endured from other Arab countries throughout, you know, this entire time in 1948, it should scare people. You think about the fact that the Iranians and what's happening right now with the Houthis,
right.
And the Iranians are no big friends of the Palestinians. They never have been. There's no love relationship there. But of course, if the Iranians have the opportunity to stow confusion and make things more chaotic there, they're going to do it because they see it as a benefit for them. And of course, we've had a long-standing feud with the Iranians and long-standing tensions with the Iranians. And we should remember that that all of these issues are much bigger than they appear to be on the outside, and that they and really do invite much more further investigations on how we move further on them.
Absolutely, absolutely, Congressman. Well, General, I want to bring you here on the supplemental as well. But before doing so, there are note cards on the middle of all of your, that don't just say what's it worth, but just normal index cards. And the Congressman's generous enough to, and the rest of our panel, to take some questions. So if you have a question, please write your question down on those index cards, and a member of our team will, in probably half an hour, pick those up, and then we'll go ahead and get those questions asked. So General, on the supplemental, let me ask you, for your perspective, as somebody who served 35 years in the United States Army, last month, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and the former Indo-PACOM Commander, General Breedlove and Admiral Sam Locklear wrote, and I'm going to quote them, they said, quote, "These investments are essential to meet the civilian security, economic, and humanitarian needs rapidly piling up before those to demand military solutions. Therefore, these agencies, defense and civilian, make up America's team, and they need urgent support." That being said, General, there's a lot of discussion about military aid in this package, which there is definitely a need. But also, there's been less of a focus on the humanitarian and economic assistance that's so crucial here as well. Can I ask you, from your perspective, as again, 35 years in the Army, why is it critical that this emergency package includes not only military aid, but critical humanitarian economic aid as well?
Well, Luke, it's a great question. I think we've had a fantastic explanation of the new world order and the instability that the Congressman has outlined for us. I think it's a vexing and very problematic situation for Americans to be in today. As a soldier, my thoughts go to two campaigns that I was a part of, one in the Balkans in the late 90s, and then in Iraq in the early 2000s. And the profound realization that you had as a soldier, which is the end of the kinetic operation, the forcible occupation or entry of military formations, was now the cause of an enormous humanitarian crisis. And what you looked for immediately as a soldier was the total combination of the U.S. government, Department of State in the lead, orchestrating humanitarian, social programs to deal with people who've been dislocated from their form of life. Now, typically, when American forces enter into a state, the state is not good of their people. They're in serious need of support and help before the campaign, but it's exacerbated now by the occupation and reality that the combat operations have been undertaken in their country. And in that environment, there is no substitute. As a soldier, I found that I was powerless to help. Simple things like restoring water, beyond a soldier's competence. And so what you looked for was support and help, and if that support and help was not present or not resourced, then you couldn't see the results of your campaign to success. And I think if we look at the difference, for example, of the relative success that we've had in the Balkans compared, for example, with what happened in Iraq, we saw that we were quite successful in the late 90s in mobilizing the totality of American power with its allies, who were pivotal in providing support and enablement. And so I would certainly agree with the premise of your point and the two Supreme Allied Commanders that you cited. They're absolutely right. We have to have a well-rounded, balanced package, and if we don't, we imperil the nation.
Thank you, General. I couldn't agree with you more. Robin, let me turn to you. I want to switch gears a little bit. This week marks the end of Women's History Month. You've had an impressive career in the government and the State Department, on Capitol Hill, and we've spent a lot of your time really focusing on youth empowerment and women's economic empowerment and advancement and gender-based violence and so much more. How is the empowerment of women and girls directly tied around the world to America's national security and prosperity right here at home?
Well, thank you. This is one of my favorite questions. I think a lot of us in the room probably have committed some of our lives to women's empowerment, or have certainly listened to a lot of panels talking about women's empowerment. But I like this question about why. Why does it matter to promote that around the world for all of us in this room? And I want to start with two truisms in diplomacy and development, which is that democracies tend not to go to war with democracies. And if you want to make a smart investment, invest in women. And those two things are so inextricably intertwined, because in countries around the world where you see the greatest amount of gender apartheid or gender discrimination are the least stable, the least democratic, the least able for all of us in this room to go on mission trips, to travel to send our kids and our students to sell our goods to. Simply, we're not going to do it. Afghanistan right now is a failed state, is a non-entity for all of us, and it is the epicenter of gender apartheid. Now, there are scales of that, clearly, right? We have a lot of countries where women can ostensibly go to the polls, but they're not meaningful members of, they're not decision makers in their home, they don't have economic empowerment, and they're not able to hold positions in governance or in commercial sector. So it really matters to all of us to do the work that we do every day, to work with a society that looks a little bit like us. And let's be a little bit prideful and say, we are a democracy. We are imperfect. A democracy is hard. It's made up of people. People are hard. We got to work at it all the time. We cannot rest on our laurels, and that's why development and diplomacy matters, because one of the greatest things that we do from the State Department perspective and the diplomacy side is to try to convey this vexing, challenging system of democracy that we are. Because what is the alternative, right? What is the alternative? And so in that, if you do not have a strong civil society, you do not have a democracy. You simply can't. And that's what is missing in so many countries where they're challenged in their governance and challenged in equality and equity. Women know what's happening in their families. Women know what's happening in their communities. And I'm sorry, guys, but women are natural networkers. And maybe we're nosy, but we care about what's happening left, right, and center. And so there are studies after studies that show if you invest in a woman, she's going to turn that around 99% and invest in her family and her children and their well-being and their health. Now, what do we know about healthy children? What do we know about educated children? They grow up to be healthy and educated adults. And every year of education for a young girl is a year she staves off marriage, is a year she staves off early pregnancy, is a year she doesn't get HIV, AIDS, or an STI. So it is complicated when you change a power structure in a family and a local community, because let's face it, there's an appearance of a zero-sum game. So if we now take a community where the men are really in charge and we go, you should share with the women, it's going to upset the balance. And so what our development experts do is they work in communities. They work with local partners who know the communities. They listen. If we're doing it right, we're listening. Americans, we're not always so great at that. We like to tell, but when we do it right, we're listening and we're responding. And if we don't have the tools at our disposal to really do that, then we're not going to be faced with a community that wants to buy our goods, that gets what we're selling, right? And so it's just very important for us to think about and care about what's happening in other communities.
Well, thanks, Robin. I think you said it right where you said, and I wrote it down, the best investment you can make is in women. I think that's right. Thank you, Robin. Let's turn to economic security. As we know, about 95% of the world's markets are outside of our borders. The fastest growing markets are in low and middle income countries. And American businesses want to take advantage, in a good way, in these new building economies. 1 in 5 jobs here in Texas and in the United States are connected to international trade, or are influenced by international trade, and more than 3.5 million of those jobs here in Texas. So Congressman, let me come to you. You have been a long proponent of strengthening America's energy security. As it's so important to your district here in northern Texas. Texas is the national leader, as you know better than me, in clean and renewable energy production, generating more than a quarter of all U.S. wind-sourced electricity. which I did not know and absolutely flabbergasted by. You sit on the prestigious House Energy and Commerce Committee, as you mentioned earlier, and you called what you called important opportunities, quote, to fight for our nation's economic security. So what does it mean, and what is the nexus between economic security, energy security, national security, and why does it matter to your constituents here in the room?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that I'm trying to do as a Democrat is to make people understand the importance between energy security and climate change. Energy security and climate change are equally as important as one another. We talked about instability in Europe and other places around the world lately and during this dialogue that we've had so far. I want everybody to understand that if you don't have economic security or energy security, you absolutely cannot effectively combat climate change. It doesn't happen. So they both go hand in hand with one another. Right. And so trying to like make people understand that, I think is hugely important as we move forward. I think that that President Biden should absolutely continue from now until November talking about the amazing accomplishments that he's made with the Inflation Reduction Act that I was proud to vote for, that's going to help advance a lot of cleaner energy technologies in this country, whether it is the more and more electric vehicles that you're going to see on the road. And I think that Texas can actually be the leader in that area, just like we've been the leader in oil and gas, and we've been the leader in solar and wind. I also think the president should talk about the fact that because he's actually drilled more oil and gas than Donald Trump. A lot of people don't realize that, and the president hasn't taken credit for it. There's been more oil and gas drilled under his administration than the previous administration. That fact has helped undermine Vladimir Putin in his unlawful invasion of the Ukraine. And we have to understand that if we want to be able to have cleaner air and we want to be able to have cleaner water, we cannot let rogue forces control hydrocarbon production throughout the world and have the rest of the developing world that has a right to develop. And that's something that we as Americans have to wrap our heads around. We think that people in places like Africa should wait. They have the right, just like we use energy to advance our country and our economics, those places in Africa and Asia, they have the right to have a better way of life for themselves as well. We want them to think about the ecology of their various countries, but they have that right. And we do not want rogue forces to control those rights because it will make it worse for climate change and the environment.
I told you you had a champion in Congress. Thank you, Congressman. I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you.
Thank you. General, let me come to you. I know you're not an economist by trade, so it maybe feels weird to get a question on the economy, but you've spent your career working to ensure that to fight against global instability. So I'm going to bring it back to the Middle East and Ukraine and help us make the connection between global instability and the economy and really what that means in the context of global stability and what that means for America and for Texans.
Well, I love the observation that democracies don't fight democracies. It seems to me that if we look at the nations that are presenting a threat to our way of life, they're generally autocracies. They do not have advanced middle classes. They don't have distribution of wealth. From our standpoint, everything we can do as a nation to be an advocate for the building of modern economic ties, trade and commerce, we are advancing our security and our stability. So as I looked at the world from my days in the Army, it was obvious to me that planning a defense budget was not strictly something that was related to weapons, munitions, and soldiers. It was related to a sound international foreign policy that had very strong elements of economic structure to it and investment. And that if we were doing advancement for our way of life, as you characterized so well, Robin, I think we're doing great things to enhance our stability.
Thank you, General. I couldn't agree with you more. Robin, let me turn to you. You're the CEO of the Texas International Education Consortium, a truly incredible resource for Texas's universities to share what they do all around the world and build global partnerships and opportunities. You call it higher education internationalization, which I think is brilliant. Tell us a little bit about your work with the consortium, and then maybe talk about why international educational partnerships are critical for our economic security. And really, I mean, everybody has a fact sheet, and it was on your chair, about some of the numbers, including here in Texas, how international affairs impacts Texas, including the number of international students here and their impact on the community. So maybe, Robin, could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I would love to, and I'm also very happy to say that we have two of our stellar university members in the house today. We have University of Texas at Dallas and University of North Texas. And these, our universities in this state are carrying a lot of the weight of what the U.S. government needs to do. And when our relations are strained at the highest diplomatic level, we really look to citizen diplomacy and our education, our pillars of education, to maintain those relations even during strained diplomatic times, because our ingenuity, what is happening in this country, it doesn't stay in this country. It goes around the world. We have to take from around the world. We have to share and collaborate. And our universities, they're required to do so. And so they really need to have the help from our diplomatic institutions to help them have international students come, to send our students abroad. But this question of, research, some of us feel like it's very esoteric. What is going on in these universities? Where are they spending all this money on? I mean, they're finding the new challenge to all of these issues that we are so worried about around the world. And let's talk about energy. One of the things that we want to do, let me stop for a second and say, how many of you, by a raise of hands, studied abroad in college? Very good. How many of you have children who have studied abroad? Nice. And how many of you that did study abroad, or your kids, do you credit some aspect of your life to that experience? A big hand back there with Kirsten, yes. So we know that our young people are at this time of such impression, right? They're so impressionable, and everything they're learning when they go to college is intense and new. And we know that what our universities have to do is this one hand of research, which is contributing to all of our global well-being, right? But they're also charged with creating adults, creating critical thinking adults. And if we don't have critical thinking adults, especially in the state of Texas, who feel comfortable with another culture, who can speak maybe a language or two, or at least feel okay in a situation where they might be confronted with another language, who realize that maybe someone pointing at you means different than when you point at someone, right? There's different cultural customs, cultures around the world, but for us to be successful in advancing shared knowledge and our economies, we have to feel comfortable in a space that is different for us, foreign. And our universities are really charged with starting that with our university students in their studies. And I think a lot of us parents are shopping for universities that are going to offer that to our kids. So we at the Texas International Education Consortium, we're 60 universities now, 40 colleges and universities in the state of Texas, and 20 around the world. And our goal is to make these partnerships easier, because we want more collaboration, not less. And again, with the 8th largest economy in the world and the biggest exporter in the United States, we have to have a workforce that can also cross borders.
Thanks, Robin. Now I want to move a bit off of what Robin said and move to what I call our humanitarian value proposition. We invest in development and diplomacy programs not because it's the right thing to do, which I think it clearly is, but because it's the smart thing to do. That being said, Congressman, I'm going to come to you first. Earlier in my life, I lived in Lebanon as Syria was falling apart, and we saw a dramatic hunger crisis then. But today we're facing probably the worst modern food crisis in history, with more than 1 in 10 people around the world going to bed hungry every night. As we know, food security and national security are deeply connected, Congressman. You know this very well. You've been a real champion of this in Congress. And 70% of the world's hungry people are living in a place in which they are affected by war, affected by war. That being said, Congressman, help us understand why you say food security is national security, and how does fighting global hunger not only create a better world, but create a better Texas?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, I think sometimes in America, we think that we're the only place in the world that deals with mass migration. Obviously, the issues that we've had along our southern border, they dominate a lot of what you see on social media, on TikTok, on Twitter, and Facebook, and what have you. But there are other parts of the world, too, where there's mass migration, oftentimes for similar reasons, and hunger is one of those reasons. If you don't adequately address hunger, if you don't adequately address, again, a lot of the growth that we're seeing in places like Africa and around Asia, where people don't have access to adequate food and water supply, it will make the world a lot more less stable, because you'll see large amounts of migration. I've met with the military officials before, and they can sit down on a map and like show you different areas where they think that if these natural resources aren't preserved in a more efficient manner, then you'll start to see people from certain parts of the world try to migrate into Europe, for instance. We have a responsibility to make sure that people can grow crops and have food security and safety, that they can do these things efficiently and as effectively as possible. And if you do that, then you don't have to worry about in the future spending more money on things like bullets. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the mission that the State Department does when it comes to things like nation building, we really cannot spend enough money on those programs because it's huge, and Texas can obviously play a very big role in that because we do have one of the world's largest economies here, and we have expertise in those areas.
Absolutely, Congressman, and I'm going to come to you, General, but I want to also mention, you said if we invest in these programs, we don't have to invest in bullets. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis said the same thing. In front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he said, if you don't fully fund the State Department, then I need to buy more ammunition. And that's why this is so important, so thank you for your leadership. Now, General, let me come to you. We know that by 2030, up to 2/3 of the world's extreme poor could live in violent and fragile places, violent settings. From your leadership in Iraq and Kuwait and Afghanistan, you saw firsthand how fragile states can pull the U.S. into conflict. Can you talk a little bit about how investments in development diplomacy prevent weak and fragile states from erupting into conflict and ultimately keeping us safer here at home? But also, why it's good for the world that America invests in this.
The history of the United States over the last 30 years has been our involvement in parts of the world that have been exactly as you've characterized, Luke. Places that have major economic dislocation is an enduring part of their economy, a failure to have strong agriculture in many cases, no basis for a working middle class to grow and prosper, and very few economic ties with global or even regional partners. In that environment, once military force is induced, all military force does is exacerbate a very serious humanitarian issue, because all of these places had a humanitarian issue before the entry of U.S. force. So the argument then becomes self-evident. The involvement, as Secretary Mattis said, of diplomacy and the tools that are mobilized by the Department of State is the cheapest and most effective and most humanitarian way to try to restore stability in struggling economies. And unfortunately, primarily I think due to climate change, the number of societies that are struggling, I think, is increasing on an annual basis. Far more than we could ever hope to deal with in a military way. We have to find a different way. And I think that's the other aspect of our recognition of reality, that we lack the assets with military force to restore some form of stability to all these troubled areas. We have no choice.
Well, thank you, General. Robin, I'm going to come to you. And as you see, we have moved on to the audience questions. So if you have a question, just put your hand up. One of our colleagues will walk around and grab your note card. But it's actually interesting. This question, Robin's on public-private partnerships. And earlier you were telling me about a partnership you worked on at the State Department with where over 300,000 visitors were coming to the United States. Also, we're very familiar with the International Visitor Leadership Program, which many of you may have met or worked with those students before. But this question is about the importance of exchange programs, the importance of America or government not doing it all alone, and really why that's the best way to address our global challenges.
Well, I also love this question. Before I answered, I want to say before Jim Mattis said that, Bob Gates said the same thing. He went up to the Hill and also said we need a strong diplomacy, we need strong public diplomacy, we need strong State Department infrastructure, because, I mean, the truth is we have been working side by side, civilians and the military, forever, right? So we mark about the 100th year anniversary, we're coming close, and I think, of something called the Fulbright-Hays Act, which creates this platform for exchange for the U.S. to have educational exchange, cultural exchange. We've been doing this for a long time, since post-World War II. So I guess not, maybe we're at 80 years. Anyway, we're gonna have to fact check all this. So it is so important for us as leaders in the world to be able to explain ourselves directly and in person, right? People get their news about us because they see us sometimes, they see our military, and they may not agree with it. They'll see something, a headline, or they'll see us on the news. And the Middle East is the epicenter of this, right? We have opposing views on certain things, and when we come out strong with the military response or a strong diplomatic response, that the people of a country where they don't have a free press are going to get a certain headline, right? They're going to see a certain side of the U.S., and Putin's doing that right now, telling his people about all the evils of us and our people. So we think that our strongest asset is the American people. When we get all of our ingenuity, all of our faith-based, all of our charities, our nonprofits, our lawmakers around the world to talk about our system, to talk about their innovations, it's mind-blowing for people. Now we know right now that that foreign affairs budget is less than 1% of the entire budget. Well, public diplomacy programs that allow you to meet your counterparts in other countries and allow them to come and experience what you do here, make those ties that when they see a headline later, they might call you, or they're going to put a person's face and experience to their knowledge of what might be behind that. It's almost nothing. It's almost nothing. And for every $1 the U.S. Congress spends on this program called the International Visitor Leadership Program, which I'll explain in a second, $8 return on investment to local communities. Because the State Department is spending a little bit of money to bring some people here to meet with amazing people in different communities around the United States, and those people are coming and spending money. They are, tax, purchasing power, all these things that's coming to your community. And then you're making a contact free to you that might be an export partner for you. That might help you to start a new program in another country, get a grant in another country. This is huge benefit to those of us who just don't have those connections. So making the fabric of our civil society and the fabrics of other civil societies, that's how we actually keep our values intact and people understanding who we are.
Absolutely, Robin. Okay, this next question, I'm going to start with you, Congressman, and then General, maybe you could jump in after that, is on NATO. It says, why, and considering your work on the Helsinki Commission, I think this is something very close to you. It says, why is NATO important to the United States, and why do we have to be involved in multilateral partnerships?
NATO is important to the United States because, as I laid out earlier, I mean, it's part of the framework that's kept us and allowed us to have relative, peace, since the end of World War II. And without that, then, perhaps you do have a situation where democracies, are fighting each other. But we all have been able to band together under this united cause, and that is to maintain peace throughout Europe and the United States. And it's worked, relatively well. And it's been a model that I think that other parts of the world outside of Europe have looked to and been a part of. I think that, Japan is a perfect example of that. They have they came out of World War II in a much more advanced view of how they should be able to grow and prosper as a country. And so it's a huge benefit for the United States. I think that what we spend in NATO and what we get in return is obviously to our best benefit. I was just at Lockheed Martin this morning and had the opportunity to see some of the planes that a lot of our NATO allies and partners are going to be, purchasing and being a part of that program. And obviously those dollars come back to Fort Worth. I mean, it's been great all the way around, but I do worry though, and really not just from Donald Trump. I do worry that there is a certain level of attractiveness. And again, I talked about World War I earlier, that there certainly is a, America first. Let's look out for ourselves first, not realizing that we have partners in places like Taiwan, where we need to be able to have access to their semiconductor availability. China, I talked about EVs earlier. China makes so much of the components needed in order for us to power that particular part of our economy. And we want to make sure that America is making those electric vehicles, because I can tell you more and more countries in Europe want them. And if we don't figure out a way how to get along with China as they become more and more stronger and bigger and they become adversarial, it will slow us down in those particular areas and perhaps allow them to dominate in those European countries instead of us. And so a lot of this is really complicated, but the money that we spend for NATO helps us in America in so many ways, and we have to continue, I think, as elected officials, as Democrats and Republicans, sell that vision to the American public, because I think now more than ever that people are buying into we should just look inward and we should just be America first and we should just be about ourselves. But I can tell you that we cannot grow our economy that way. We cannot be safe that way, and that is just not how the world works these days. It's not feasible. It's not realistic.
Right. Couldn't agree more. General, on NATO and maybe China as well.
NATO has been the dominant element of my military career, and many, many years were spent serving in Germany as a part of NATO. Americans need to appreciate a couple of things. First, the largest, most significant unintended consequence of Putin's invasion of Ukraine was the reinvigoration of NATO. Inconceivable to me as a soldier to think that Scandinavia is now lock, stock, and barrel a part of NATO. The most militarily and politically significant addition to NATO that there has been in its entire existence. And they're in it seriously. As a soldier, NATO gave us a framework, an operating framework that ensured we had military interoperability and capability. It gave muscle to the bones that were the nations. And it was very, very effective at giving us common tactics, common procedures, and a common language. And it gave us credibility from a military standpoint. But the larger element of NATO that I think is very visible now, that we're, as the Congressman has said very well, threatening to weaken, is its real dimension, and the real victory of it is political. It's political capability to speak with one voice about values and principles that unite all democracies. And to the extent that we subscribe to NATO and support NATO, even acknowledging the differences within the nations that are a part of it, we strengthen the principles under which our nation and our economy reside. So it's hugely important, and it's very sad to have us denigrate NATO. And as a final comment, as a soldier, what I could tell Americans is we never, ever understand today the depth of the host nation's commitment to NATO that is never put into dollars. Every day we are operating in their railheads, in their airfields, and in their farm fields is a kind of a contribution that is very significant and represents national will at the very local level. And we Americans very cynically and callously disregard that. We're ignorant of it, and we shouldn't be. That's part of the value of an alliance, which is you have mutual capability born of mutual sacrifice, very often in different ways, in-kind contributions. And that is what NATO has done for us in ways that Americans ought to appreciate in a way that we don't.
Absolutely, General. Thank you. Next question. I'm going to move, Congressman, I'm going to start with you on this one. The question specifically, we already mentioned the horrific earthquake yesterday in Taiwan. Can you talk a little bit about what assistance the United States gives to Taiwan at this point, and maybe bring this back to the supplemental, which includes some money, of course, some assistance to Taiwan, and why is that important, our partnership with the Taiwanese?
Yeah, obviously, and we have tremendous partners here in the Taiwanese community, Taiwanese American community here in Dallas. Just amazing that advocate on a lot of these various issues. And our relationship with Taiwan is key, especially when it comes to making sure that we can maintain some level of rapport with China. Because as soon as China sees that they think that Taiwan is weak, that they think that they see the opportunity to go in there and destabilize that country, they will do it. And we need to pass this relief package, and it needs to have as much funding as we can provide for Taiwan in order to send the message that this is something that is of the utmost importance to Taiwan. We don't want the Chinese to think that, for instance, that perhaps we are taking an America first, type approach to when it comes to Taiwan, and that we are willing to, perhaps step back some, because that is exactly what the Chinese are looking for, and it would allow them to control so much of what I talked about a little bit earlier. You talk about renewable energy, you talk about electric vehicles, you think about those components and those partnerships that we have with companies in Taiwan, because of that relationship that we have with that government, that we could no longer be able to advance should that relationship falter. And so I think that people should pay very close attention to it. I think that it's something that people should advocate for, because there is absolutely no reason why the Chinese wouldn't control and make it harder for us to have advancements in those areas as they're trying to surpass us. Right now they see us as a faltering nation, and they see themselves as a nation that's continually on the rise, but they know that they're still not where we are yet. Well, of course, if they have the opportunity to slow us down when it comes to business, when it comes to trade, they will do it knowing that it will give them the upper hand and put them in the correct pole position to be able to surpass us. And a lot of that is, I think, probably too complicated in a certain sense, but we need for everybody to understand it, because it can affect our everyday lives in ways that people just probably have never thought about.
Absolutely, Congressman. I couldn't agree more. Robin, I'm going to come to you with this next one. It says the U.S. is not having much success attacking the Russian economy through sanctions and other things. Is there anything else that we can do? And I want to come to you because obviously President Biden has made clear we're not putting America's troops into Ukraine. So if we're not having success, as the question suggests, in addressing the economy, from a military standpoint, we won't have boots on the ground. As a former diplomat, what else can we do?
This is exactly where our next generation is so vitally important, because it's really hard to care about something so far away when you have existential issues right in front of you in your own family, or just at home, or your social media is so personalized that you're getting a very small amount of issues in your feed every day, and that's what you use. I'm going to say our universities really stand to be the ones to teach our youth about what's at stake. I mean, many of us were children of the Cold War. We learned about things in elementary school, and maybe it was propaganda, but we learned things according to what seemed to be really important to our country. At university, one of the biggest reasons why we do this mouthful called internationalization of higher education is because we need to bring global concepts into all kinds of learning. And what's happening in Ukraine, and what's happening with Russia, and what that means for our families. Why would we spend so much time and treasure on something so far away? We've got to show our kids the connection back to our democracy, what the future is that they expect to have, right? You've been talking so much about renewable energy, and the future of energy is vital, and we're right in Texas, and energy security is really huge, and our young people have a chance to work on this directly, and to develop new energy sources that take the control out of some of the worst actors in the world. So it's very exciting, but we have to kind of connect the dots for them. So I think when we're educating about these issues in everyone's everyday lives, that helps. I mean, clearly, we have to keep the engine of development going. I mean, the United States, love it or not like it, democracy is a core value of ours, and that plays into the kind of programs that we do around the world to explain what a democracy is and to show the good, the bad, and the ugly. Maybe China's calling us a faltering state. People have a voice, and we want to continue to strengthen why that is the better alternative.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. I'm going to start with you, Congressman, then General, I'm going to come to you as well. This next one is on climate change, and I specifically want to bring it in the context of military readiness as well. But Congressman, to start with you, as you know, I'm going to add a little bit of context, so sorry to whoever wrote this beautifully written note. As we know that what happens in the context of our climate is affecting our military as well, our military installations, our military capacity, et cetera. I know you already touched on climate, Congressman, but why, maybe for the question itself, why is it important that we invest in climate change for our national security?
I think for a lot of different reasons. From an economic standpoint, I talked about the fact that in Europe, like I was in Norway this past summer at an energy conference there, and it was fascinating to see that the Norwegian government has basically paid people to have an electric vehicle, and you see a lot of them. If you go to Norway and you see an E on the license plates, that means that it's an electric vehicle. And right now, electric vehicle sales in the U.S. aren't doing as well as anticipated, and you see a lot of the pickup trucks and things like that that are sitting on the lots. But that doesn't mean that there won't be more European countries that are going to follow the Norway model. And from an economic standpoint, we have to make sure that Detroit is the leader when it comes to the deployment and the manufacturing of these vehicles, because we cannot afford, we can't have a strong Detroit to just build internal combustible engine cars just for Americans when the rest of the world wants these other vehicles. And so I want people to think about that. The other piece where we have to continue to invest in renewable energy and think about issues around climate change is that, I mean, we've seen just how the politics around the ups and downs of oil prices can affect things like elections. And oftentimes, a lot of the rhetoric around whose fault it is that gas prices are this high and why the price of oil per barrel is this high, a lot of it is just, Democrats and Republicans, again, just jockeying for position. But it really fails to tell the entire story about global oil supply. And we're less subject to Americans making really bad energy policy decisions based on gas prices if we're less and less, dependent on that. And again, for the developing world, we certainly do need to be the leaders when it comes to making sure that countries that want to develop have the energy capacity that they need. We don't want Venezuela or the Russians or some other country that's not as stable to provide those needs for people, because they will see them as the way countries saw us right after this post-World War II order that began to emerge after the end of the Great War. So I think for those two reasons alone is why we have to continue to make these investments. And we need to, we talked a lot about military here. One of the things that I love about serving on House Armed Services Committee is that, with the exception of one time since I've been on the committee, that bill has passed out of committee literally with less than 5 people voting against it. Overwhelmingly, Democrats and Republicans vote for the NDAA bill. When it comes out onto the House floor, it's very similar. It has overwhelming support for Democrats and Republicans when it comes out onto the House floor. When it comes to these issues around energy security and climate change, it needs to be more about how we talk about the military and how we approach having a strong defense in this country versus it being this sort of very black and white issue that is unfortunately being talked about now, like guns, for instance. It's not as simple as the gun debate. Energy is absolutely not as simple as the gun debate. Climate change is not as simple as the gun debate. But if we keep talking about it that way, we're going to continue to have bad policy, and we cannot afford that in this country.
Speaking my language, Congressman. I'm going to, same question to you, General, but a little bit of context. Last year I was at CENTCOM in Southern Florida, and they told us about the extraordinary amount of investment that the Department of Defense had to make to ensure that CENTCOM was ready to, because of rising sea levels, because it's right on the sea there. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska, and Offutt Air Force Base is in Bellevue, Nebraska, which you know very well, where it's the home of U.S. Strategic Command, or U.S. and a very important base where all of our nuclear weapons would be sent from is in Omaha, Nebraska, and they had a once-in-a-millennium flood 2 years ago that flooded the entire base. So from a military perspective, why is this important, General?
Well, it's a great question. I'll divert from form right now. You've been calling me a general. That is what I once was. But for the last 10 years, I'm proud to say I've been a small business CEO down in San Antonio, proudly owned for the last 6 years by Texas investors based here in Dallas. And so now I look at the federal government with a very different eye, as you can imagine. It's problematic, it's difficult, and our survival has been a question every year. And for the 110 employees that I'm responsible for, going to bed at night is often very hard. So let's take the issue of energy independence and trying to do something about global climate change and put it in practical terms. As a former military strategist, my answer is fully electric is not right for DoD in an expeditionary environment at this time, for the same reason that fully electric won't work in Montana right now. It's obvious, it's self-evident. But that is not the excuse not to do something. The answer is clear and apparent, and you see it everywhere with the simple vehicles that are out here today, hybrid electric. Hybrid electric has enormous potential for the military. Why? Because it extends fuel economy. And the issue of resupplying our soldiers with fuel was the biggest operational killer in our last 2 campaigns. So let's take opportunities that we have. We, for example, are working with John Deere that has a system that is compatible with the machine I make, which is a rough terrain container handler. In other words, when you want to move containers in a rough world, we're the guys who do it, and we're the only people in the world who provide the capability. So now what you ought to expect is encouragement. Let's make hybrid electric something that is quick and easy to put into existing platforms across DoD. Not so fast, pal. The answer is the subsidies go to the large firms. They don't go to the small ones. Now, I would argue as the former Army G8, for good reason. I don't have the money to invest in small programs. That's where a whole of government approach comes. Where is the tax incentive that says, okay, little company in San Antonio, you're making a substantial investment, self-funding, a major change. Where is the partnership with the federal government in the form of a tax incentive that enables us to make the move and bring to DoD a complete, fully supported solution? We're almost there, but it's taken us 3 times as long because we've done it on our own with small Texas investors supporting us. So my answer then is it's absolutely essential that we make this conversion to a smarter, more energy efficient DoD. It's the lives that are saved as well as the efficiency that is generated operationally. But we need a whole of government approach. And my hope, Congressman, would be is you who write the authorization bills looks at ways to essentially direct DoD to take smart approaches.
Yeah.
Don't tell me you don't have the money.
Right.
Tell me how you can go to work, Department of the Army, Department of the Navy, et cetera, to use existing tools within the government to drive us to choose better solutions and to incent small providers, not the defense giants. Right. I'm not a defense giant, I'm a pygmy, but I matter. We provide the only capability to do a critical capability, and nobody cares about us. And those are the things now as a small business CEO I look at and say, I wish I could jump back into my previous perch, and it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But you don't relive your past, you live with the present and the future. That's my status. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you, General. We have one final question for all three of you, and then we're going to invite our friend Kirsten up to the stage to close us out. But Robin, let me start with you. Over the past few years, USGLC has been making the case for why American leadership is important both at home and around the world. Between worsening global food insecurity, as we talked about, strategic competition with China, and so much more, we know that global instability is affecting us here at home. So in your work and in your words, can you say, what is it worth? As I asked all of you to write on your sheets, so please do. What is it worth for us to invest in diplomatic and development tools here at home? And what's it worth for Texas and America to lead globally, to commit to diplomacy and development? So what's it worth, Robin? General, you're next.
I think I can best illustrate this by bringing you back to 1997, the first ever democratic election in Bosnia, and the year 2000, the first democratic election in Kosovo, and 2005, the first democratic election in Iraq. Now, these countries that followed are not perfect, and the situation has been really challenging. But I just bring us back to, I was there for all of those. I guess that's why I'm telling you. People dressed up and stood in line for 12, 14, 18 hours to vote. Sorry, that's the part I wanted to tell you. Whole families in the dark, in no electricity. We lost electricity in Kosovo. People were standing in the dark, and illiterate people, fingerprinting, keeping the ink on their fingers for so long because of the pride, because they thought that once they made that move, they would go forward. I also want to tell you about a young man in Kosovo who was of Albanian ethnicity. He was Albanian, Kosovar Albanian, and had never had the chance to even dream about being part of the governance of his province, and which then became a country. The second the international community came in, the internet, the nascent internet happened, our universities, our schools, they started to realize that there was a world out there that he could be part of, and the engine of his mind started turning and turning, and he was asking me about every kind of program he could be on, every kind of exchange program he could get on. He had dreams that would be realized. That's what it's worth. Keeping people locked for someone's power-hungry ambition is the absolute opposite of what this country is. And so it's worth it to all of us to remain vigilant for that.
Thanks, Robin. General.
I think you said it. I can't really improve on those words, Robin. The passion that you spoke about, the sense of identity, the sense of growth. Not perfect, and as you say, the stumbles since then don't diminish the nobility of what was started. I loved it.
Congressman.
Yeah, I love what Robin said too. I'm going to kind of follow the general there. But I do want to close with this because we've talked about a lot of really important things here. I can remember I probably had just graduated from high school when we got ready to have the first Gulf War. And a few years before that, there was this I'm a Gen Xer, there's a very popular song that had come out, and it was called 19. And it was about the Vietnam War, and the song was basically about the average age of someone drafted into the Vietnam War was age 19. And I can remember me and a large group of people that I went to high school with, and some people from some other high schools. We were at some restaurant and all just kind of sitting around talking, and people were scared at the very beginning of the war. Because all of us had heard our baby boom parents, and some of us I didn't have parents that were in Vietnam, but all of us probably had relatives or neighbors and friends. Some of the people in this group had family that had been in the Vietnam War, and we talked about different stories that their parents had told them about Vietnam and the draft, and we don't realize how lucky that. How well that war went for the U.S. when we pushed Iraq out of Kuwait. But the fact that we have had relative peace again since World War II, outside of Korea and Vietnam, which we were trying to stop the threat of communism, obviously, and made some mistakes in Vietnam, particularly going in there at all. But, you know, no one has been asked to give up their job and go and work at a defense plant. Again, I was at Lockheed this morning. I think about the Rosie DeRivers, the women that went to go and work at those plants. No one's been asked to give up their job and go work at a defense plant. No one has been drafted. No one has been asked to ration. If you think that being asked to wear a mask was bad, imagine being asked to ration. People would lose their minds. We have had relative peace because of the investments that we have made in defense and because of the investments that we have made in things like diplomacy and state building through the State Department. And the minute that more and more of us buy into the America First, again, what I call the inward model, where we only think about ourselves and us just doing for ourselves, then we will slip back into that time. And I have a 17-year-old about to turn 18, and that's not the life that I want for him. I thank our veterans that fought during the Vietnam War, and I thank all those 19-year-olds that were drafted, many of whom did not come home, or they did come home with bad PTSD or lost limbs. But that is not something that our country wants to revisit. And when we are trying to make investments in defense and we're trying to make investments in diplomacy, I want people to think about that. And when you hear more and more conversations about America turning inward, to please reject it and to let, whether you're Democrat or Republican, to let your representatives and your senators know that you reject that rhetoric, because we don't want to go back to those times.
Congressman Mark Vesey, everybody. And to close us out, my colleague Kirsten Kohlenberg, who you should all know if you don't already. Kirsten.
Well, hey, everybody. If you don't know me already, my name is Kirsten Kohlenberg, and I oversee USGLC's outreach efforts here in Texas, as well as in Colorado and New Mexico. But I am born and raised right here in North Texas, so it's wonderful to be able to gather this group together. Many of you are friends, people I've known for years. Many of you are involved with USGLC already, and some of you aren't. So I'd like to continue the conversation. Please don't hesitate to be in touch with me moving forward. I'd like to thank our panel here today, General Speaks, Robin Lerner, and of course, Congressman Vesey. Let's give them one more round of applause. I'd also like to thank our partners, the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, which I will be a member of for life, and the North Texas Commission. Thank you both very much for your partnership today. And I also finally want to thank members of our Texas Advisory Committee in the room. Your involvement with USGLC just truly means the world, so you'll be hearing from me very soon on where we go from here. When Representative Vesey and other members of the Texas congressional delegation support America's global leadership and our development and our diplomacy programs, it is so important that everyone in this room make your voices known. Like the Congressman was just saying, be vocal. So send congressional staff thank you notes and your thoughts on current affairs. Highlight to your local newspaper. I know several people here who write op-eds for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Dallas Morning News. Be as vocal as you can there. Call into your radio stations, but also just have the conversation with your families and friends. If you have taken anything away from today, is just being vocal about these America's values and the return on investment that it pays for North Texas. It goes very far. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters is really crucial. So on that note, please do stay on the lookout for a follow-up note from me with photos from today. And if you're new to the USGLC network and want to learn more, please be sure to opt into updates with us. Everyone in this room, whether you received a cold email from me inviting you today or have known you for years, you are part of an important group of people in this country and in North Texas who have the ability to make an impact. I hope that you are able to join us. Mark your calendars, Washington, D.C. on June 3rd and 4th for USGLC's annual Global Impact Forum. It is 2 full days of exciting speakers and networking opportunities, culminating in a visit to congressional delegation on Capitol Hill. We met with Congressman Vesey last year in person. We had a wonderful conversation that started the engine to get this program going today. So I hope that you'll be able to join us. It's a really fun time. Watch me like run around Capitol Hill, and it's just wonderful. It's sweaty, and it's a long day, but very worth it. So please let me know if you'd like to find out more about that. Thank you all again for your support, your passion, your voice. Congressman, thank you for your leadership. Because of people like you, the best part of my job is getting to know each and every one of you. America remains a leading force of good in the world. Thank you very much. With that, we'll conclude. Thanks. Have a good day.